Tom, I know you asked Hunter Yurachek last week about the conversations that he was trying to have with Jack Swarbrick, the Notre Dame athletic director. I don't know if you saw him make a statement to ESPN earlier this week that he would like to see the season be pushed back, and he's thinking that it would be between 8 and 10 games this season. How much do you think Arkansas is going to be a part of that shortened season if it ends up coming to fruition for Notre Dame, Tom?
Good morning, guys. Pleasure to be on here with you. Yeah, I think if Notre Dame could pick the games it would wanted to play, I think Arkansas would be way up there. A, it's a big name team from the SEC, and they've had some poor success against SEC teams in recent years. And B, it's a team that's in a downtrend or was in a downtrend, and would seem to be a game they'd be highly favored in. So if they had their choices, I'm sure they'd like to play it. But if this thing winds up being a conference-only type scenario for both the ACC and the SEC, then Notre Dame would probably funnel right into, as a scheduling partner with the ACC, would probably wind up picking up some ACC games in addition to the ones they already have. And Arkansas would likely be left out. But I would see how this game would be super attractive to both schools. And so if the season gets pushed back, it would take some jiggling around to keep that game on the schedule. And I did see Heather Dinich's report that basically led into the college football game day special, the status of the season or whatever, state of the season, that aired on, I forget what night it was now, maybe Tuesday night, maybe Monday night. But anyway, yeah, I saw it, and of course, that's kind of the trend right now. I mean, our numbers in Arkansas are not drastically improving. They're just kind of leveled off right now, and it seems to me like we're going to need to catch some kind of big break in the next couple of weeks for the season to start as planned. But I think the leaders in college sports want to get in some kind of season, and they're going to do everything they can to get in some kind of season.
Because Tom, Hunter laid it out for us. They start out with the 12 game, then there could be conference only, and maybe the incorporation of some other Power 5 schools and stuff, whatever. And he said the last line of defense for college football would be to play a spring only schedule. So on that note, Tom, how close are we to playing spring football this year?
I don't think we're very close to that at all. I just think it's very unpalatable. There's so many reasons, and the crew, Reese Davis and Greg McElroy, Joy Galloway, and those guys kind of laid out the reasons why, when you think about this from the perspective of the higher-end prospects, A, why risk yourself, putting yourself out there that close to the NFL draft? And B, how do you turn around and finish off a season in, say, May or something, and then turn right back around and have camps opening? Just doesn't seem real viable. And so I just think that's a last resort type measure. And plus, it's the overlay of college football on top of what's already, a busy NCAA basketball calendar, and then baseball. Just seems like it would be super complicated. Yeah. So salvaging what they can from the fall, I believe, is priority number one. And I just kind of like the way Hunter and Greg Sankey have kind of laid this thing out. We have to do our due diligence. I mean, we properly should be preparing for a full game schedule, a full schedule. And if we don't, that's the top priority. That gets wiped out. Then we go to priority number 2. And so the next week is going to be real telltale, because on Friday, you guys know Walkthroughs can start. And then I think it's August the 7th, the Razorbacks, 29 days out from their scheduled opener, could essentially start fall camp.
Yeah, a lot of dominoes, should start falling in the next 10 days or so. But it seems to me, Tom, that, 12 games seems very unlikely. It's almost maybe just a step ahead at this point of spring football. But it seems like 12 games going to scheduled September 5th just seems like hard to do at this point and pull it all off. To me, 9 games doesn't work, because then how are you going to figure out who gets 5 home games, who gets 4? So to me, it's either going to be 8 or 10, because the battle would be, well, which schools are going to get that extra home game? And that's going to be the fight right now, is how do you maximize, how do you get the most revenue that is available out there on the reduced number of home games, because all of these programs are going to be working with less for the balance of the 2020 year.
Absolutely, they are. And, yeah, I mean, I do think that we're going to have to catch some kind of break, like a drastic reduction in some of the positive tests in the Deep South over the next week. Maybe. It looks like a long shot, but maybe. And then I think you're right. I don't think 9 games is real palatable. I think an even number. And you know that the schools in the East that have their crossover game, their out-of-conference against ACC, the Florida States, Georgia Tech, South Carolina, Clemson, and in this case, Arkansas Notre Dame, you know they're going to be fighting to keep those games on the schedule. So maybe 9 games with 1 out-of-conference. And then, everybody plays 4 home, 4 away in conference, because I don't think you want to get into messing with the schedule that much, really tinkering and moving games and all that kind of stuff. But it has to be on the table. And as Brandon Marcello pointed out, they might front load the schedule with your division games, meaning Arkansas would play the Alabamas, Auburns, LSU's, and Ole Miss, Mississippi State A&M a little earlier in their schedule, and then their crossover games later. Yeah. So, we'll see what comes of it. I just hope they can get off to a good start and nobody's walkthroughs result in some kind of a new breakout, because something like that would be kind of the public perception would really turn into, what are we doing here? Yeah. And we don't want that.
You mentioned the walkthroughs. I guess tomorrow's the date where they kind of go to the next level or the next step, and they involve a football. And, so far they've just really been doing agilities and conditioning with coaches present. Kind of walk the audience through and let's go through kind of what happens next, because I believe tomorrow's the date where they can kind of ramp it up to the next level with the coaches. That's
right. It's non-pads. Well, barring any kind of last-minute change, tomorrow would be the opening of what's called enhanced summer advanced summer opportunities. And so there would be full-team walkthroughs, and, walkthroughs are just basically, here's a play, and here's what you do on this play, and you try to do it at a decent speed. Obviously contact is to a minimum and that type of thing. But in this case, it would be Felipe Franks throwing passes to receivers with Kendall Browse, the offensive coordinator, witnessing it, ostensibly for the very first time, which is just really stunning since he's been on campus this long. But that's the nature of it, and it's just so imperative for Arkansas to be able to maximize what they get out of the walkthroughs. Because if there's a season, the time for them to prepare just seems so tight, having not had any spring practice at all. And so that would be starting tomorrow, and that would go on for, I think they get 20 hours per week where they can do walkthroughs and film study and conditioning stuff. And then on August the 7th, it would ramp up to a true opening of camp, and the acclimatization period that takes place there, several days, no pads, and then you're getting into the low double digits in August, and they're going to put pads on if everything goes on course.
Tom Murphy with us of the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. Tom, in hour number 1, we spoke to the idea of Arkansas potentially going winless this season. Now, if their non-conference games are played, Arkansas's not going winless. But if it's a conference-only schedule and you go through the meat of SEC and you don't get a single cupcake team, Tom, what percentage would you place on Arkansas, which they've never done, 126 years, never happened? Could there be a chance that Arkansas goes winless this year if they only play conference games?
Well, obviously there would be a chance, but they would ramp it up for some of the home games, and they'd have a chance at games like Missouri, because I think Arkansas's talent level is trickling upwards. Obviously, they're enhanced at quarterback in my view. Offensive line should be better. I do have concerns about how they're going to plug guys in on defense after losing their best player from each level on defense. How you plug in and have enough depth to hold these teams down. And so there would be decent odds that it could be a winless season. But I would just think there'd be a breakthrough somewhere in there, kind of like that 2014 season. I think the Razorbacks then knew they were pretty good, and they gave some teams some great battles, like the Mississippi State game on the road, the first ever number one team in the college football playoff rankings was Mississippi State, and Arkansas went over there and had the lead 10-0 and had chances to build on it, and they had a breakdown on defense that led to a long touchdown pass, and they lose 17-10. I mean, that's the game that's so famous for Trey Flowers. I mean, that team had been fighting so hard, and then in the locker room outside, Trey Flowers just broke down because they had been giving these teams all they could handle. Mm-hmm. And, of course, then the breakthrough came a couple of weeks later when they played LSU. So I feel like no matter if that's what happens, I think there'd be a breakthrough somewhere.
So, Tom, when you talk about the breakthrough, let's go back to 2014 when that occurred. Even the year before, Tom, like they had LSU on the ropes in Death Valley, and Anthony Jennings came in for the injured Zach Menberger, threw that long touchdown as a true freshman. I mean, you talk about the pleading, but they finally did get over the hump, as you mentioned, in 2014. 17-0 against LSU, 30-0 against Ole Miss, and they blow out Texas in the Texas Bowl. Tommy and I were talking about earlier just the ending strong. What game do you think Arkansas has a major opportunity towards the end of the year to really get things going and get that first SEC win?
Well, I mean, it could also be earlier in the year because, as I've mentioned on y'all's show so many times, that A&M series, okay, they've lost. Is it 8 in a row? I don't know. It's a long stretch
since 2012
right now of losses.
Yeah,
and so many of those games were overtime, or Arkansas was really had the upper hand late in the game. I mean, particularly that 2014 game. So the A&M game, which is earlier in the season, that could be a breakthrough game. I mean, all it takes is, winning the turnover battle, 3-1, and, just catching the lucky break, having a big special teams play go in your favor. You guys all know it's been a thin line between winning and losing on a lot of these games. And in others, I mean, clearly they've been outclassed by Alabama and LSU and Auburn in recent years. But the A&M series has been close. The Mississippi State one is the one that boggles my mind. I mean, there have been blowouts in recent years that probably shouldn't have been blowouts. But the Bulldogs are ahead of Arkansas right now. So I wouldn't put it past them to have a shot on the road against Mississippi State with a new coach and a lot of changeover. They lost a lot of their defensive players. I mean, Ole Miss, a changeover. I mean, I love the quarterback Plumlee, what he did. But who knows how they're going to operate that offense this year. Yeah. So I would give Arkansas a decent shot in that game as well. And, who knows what happens against Auburn, LSU, and Alabama. They would be heavy underdogs, but you never know. And, of course, they have Tennessee at home. And even though Tennessee has had some major wins in the last couple of years, they've also laid some eggs. So who knows? I just predicted if it's just 8 games, they find a way to break through somewhere.
We'll have a couple more visits before I think some decisions are made, but I want to kind of go back to that because the next 10 or so days are going to be so monumental for college sports, and I think some of the decisions that are made. How do you think this is ultimately being decided? People are focused on ADs and commissioners and people like Greg Sankey, but I'm of the opinion, Tom, that it's really people like Joseph Steinmetz and boards of trustees and people at that level that are really having the conversations and basically passing their decisions on to people like Greg Sankey to communicate their decisions. Are you of that opinion, or do you where at what level do you think these decisions will be made in the coming days?
Right. I tend to agree with you. I mean, the stuff works hand in glove. Greg Sankey is a very powerful man, and he would give recommendations. But I do think that the chancellors and presidents of the SEC, based on the advice of their highest-ranking public health officials in their state, armed with the numbers that they have at the time, will wind up making the recommendation and ultimately the decision.
I mean, no one wants to put their name, their butt on the line by themselves because they don't. If it goes wrong, they don't want to be held accountable for it. So,
well, I mean, this is a good time for leadership, and I think that the chancellors and presidents would put their stamp on, this is what we've decided, we're going to live with this. Yeah. And, you know, if you look at the opening remark on all of these statements, like the Big South yesterday, it was, with the idea of student health and the health and welfare of all our student athletes and staff, this is what we've decided. It may be that late next week the SEC says, we're going to give this one more week, but at this point, this is what we think. Because those openers are coming at us pretty quick now.
Yeah.
And, I mean, as much as I want to see Nevada in here playing Arkansas, I just think that they're going to have to catch some kind of a lucky break to get that game in.
And I agree. And as much as the health and safety of everyone involved needs to be considered and should continue to be considered, I think the economic impact of how it's going to affect every town square, every local market, every state market across the Southeastern Conference and across college football, they need that information too. They need to also understand, if you don't play, here's what's going to happen economically. And they need all the information, the full scope of it, because there's going to be great impact financially if college football, if the season is wiped out.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And I read some stuff yesterday that I think the German Soccer League and some other European leagues have come back, and you know they had good testing that allowed them to restart their seasons, and seemingly things have gone off pretty good. And I'd like to think that the USA could rally up and its citizens could do their best at hey, let's all work together and see if we can get ourselves back to normal lives and get our economy back rolling, because our economy was doing fabulous before this all hit in March. So I'd like to think that the industry of the American people would lead us to restarting our engines pretty quickly. And so it may not be on September 5th, but I'd like to think that we're going to be getting back to normalcy at some point pretty soon.
Hope that's the case, man. Tom Murphy of Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. Tom, appreciate it, man. Have yourself a good weekend.
You betcha. Talk to y'all next week.
All right. Thanks, Tom.